one thing I really struggle with sometimes people today who are at university is that they just expect to leave university with a 2-1 and just walk straight into a job. And I'm like, guys, this is not how the world works. Like, I interview a lot of people now, and because there's so many of them, and that's my point. It's like, you're very good as an individual, but unfortunately there's just too many of you. And so what are you doing to continuously show that you are different from other people?
You're going to stand out.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cafe Rainy Days. Today at Cafe Rainy Days, we've got a guest from the financial sector, and she's really, really young, successful. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Hi, Ashlesha. Welcome to Cafe Rainy Days.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Before we carry on, usual humble request to please subscribe to the channel. Ashlesha Vaishampayan is a Vice President, Consultant Relations in a top financial institution in Singapore. Ashlesha is a graduate in classics from King's College London. She's had a very, very illustrious career, and she's been nominated at such a young age for several financial awards. And she was also named as one of the top 50 female future leaders by Financial Times in 2018. So several accolades for Ashlesha. Another thing that Ashlesha also does is she campaigns and just spreads the word for vitiligo awareness. Yeah, so we'll also be talking about that. I'm going to straight jump into the subject matter. So given that you were named one of the top 50 female leaders, for you, what constitutes good leadership? Who is an ideal leader?
You keep getting this asked this question quite a few times. What makes a good leader? What skills or attributes should a good leader have? Someone who leads by example, so puts their money where their mouth is. I think that for me is really, really important. I think someone who is not only intellectually curious and astute, but also emotionally curious and astute is very important. And so you need a leader who's going to be able to flex to the different personality types that you have in your team. So that would definitely be the second. I think someone who is positive is something that's actually a very underrated trait in a leader. I'm not saying that you have to be happy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because that's just not realistic. But I do think, people do look to their leaders to kind of guide them through, especially the choppier times. And so I do think you have a responsibility to your team to not be, fake, but I think be as positive and encouraging as you can. And then I think finally someone who is realistic with their team. So I think, leaders have a role of conveying sometimes messages that are not particularly fun, or, being the bearer of bad news, or having to kind of give constructive criticism or be motivating and, optimistic as well. So for me, something I really value in someone is someone who's transparent and realistic. And, I do appreciate that the sensitivities that leaders have, so they can't be completely open with their team members, but the best leaders that I've witnessed in my careers are the ones who are very good at just being very, very pragmatic with their teams. There's many more things we can talk about, but
of course.
I think they were the first four that came to mind for me.
Yes. How do you see it? How different is leadership from 20, 30 years ago? How have the challenges changed for a leader?
That's a very good question, actually. So I think the way I'd kind of think about it is in three different aspects, right? So number one, what is the cultural environment of leaders that leaders operate in now versus 20, 30 years ago? So if we're looking back 20, 30 years ago, I'd say firstly there were less women in the workforce. People tended to stay in the same company for a very long time, and people tend to stick to the same career path, right? So you'd start off, for example, in engineering, you'd retire in engineering. Now you have many more women in the workforce. I think people tend to move around a lot jobs-wise. So, they're bringing very different skill sets with every move that they're making. They're not going to necessarily stay in the same career their whole life. I started off my working life in executive search recruitment. I'm now in asset management. I did a degree in languages. There's no linear way of pathing that, right? How has, leadership changed with the view of all of that, I think firstly, that whole old school mentality of you have to be technically qualified to do a job isn't necessarily as true now as I think it was 20, 30 years ago. I think employers are a lot more open-minded to people who can be taught on the job and who perhaps demonstrate more of the cultural aspects of a company rather than ticking every single box on that list that perhaps would have been a need 20, 30 years ago. I think secondly, we've got to remember the role that technology's played, so I think 20, 30 years ago, people in Hong Kong perhaps weren't aware of how things were done in Paris or how things were done in Brazil. Right. The advent of the internet, and I think social media in particular, has made people a lot more aware of, okay, this is how a leader is behaving in my role in a completely different part of the world. And so I think leadership has perhaps evolved with the advent of the internet because a lot more information is available for us at our fingertips without having to pay any money for it, right? And so, you have people doing a lot more leadership courses, whether that's through their company or in their own time. That expectation or that resource wasn't even really there 20, 30 years ago. So I think, again, the way a leader evolves now is very different because of technology. And then I think the other thing is, in 20, 30 years ago, there was that mentality of, okay, you have to put in the hard yards before you can kind of get up to the CEO position or the CFO position or whatever, right? I think now the reality is that the supply of qualified people is far higher than the roles available to them. And so I think it's a case of, okay, well, I'm not going to, especially I can speak for my generation, we're all in our early 30s. We're not going to wait around for 10 years to get a job because we know that if we move companies, and that's kind of going back to a point I made earlier, that you move around jobs a lot more than you would before. But I also know that bargaining power for me to get to that leadership position is very different now. So looking at it from a different lens of, okay, what does it take to mean to be a leader now? It's also, you have to come at it from, okay, well, who are the people that could be leaders? And in a way, if you're not keeping up with the times and realizing that, okay, someone doesn't have to be in a role for 10 years to get a position, then you're also losing out on very good talent.
One of the things that you said, Ashlesha, is that so many years ago, there were fewer women in just the workforce, and there are a lot more now. Is this concept of a glass ceiling, does that still exist?
I was genuinely quite shocked, actually, still that, 10 years ago, there were still so few women, in particularly, I think, mid to senior roles. Like, that was the thing I identified. So I think if you looked at it at the graduate perspective, I think it was fairly okay, seeing peers of mine who are leaving for, having a baby or, deciding to take a break or whatever. Like, I do think there is still a bit of a glass ceiling, yes. I think it is a little bit harder for women, yes. Now, I'll use the maternity example because I think that's the most obvious one to do. You leave and then you come back. And I've seen this with so many people I know that they've missed out on, like in the UK, like a year's worth of work, right? In different parts of the world, it's different durations. And then coming back, they're not as eligible for promotion because they've been out for like a year, right? And so then the knock-on impacts that's actually having. So I compare, I haven't got children. I compare where I've started off compared to some people who now have. And I'd say, yeah, they have been negatively impacted and there is a bit of a glass ceiling. I think the other glass ceiling, which I've personally, been exposed to, is your age and then the role that you're doing. So sometimes it's a case of, oh no, you're too young to be taking that next step. So everyone talks about the female male glass ceiling, but what about the age glass ceiling? Yeah. And shouldn't it be what you can bring to the role and the ideas that you have and the vision that you have and I guess the commitment and the conviction that you have in the role in the company that should be determining whether you can progress to the next level, not your age. And so I think the age glass ceiling is actually something that people don't really talk about. And I think it's because obviously there's, a bit more sensitivity around that one because you can't really ask people their age. I am a very positive person. Like, I think the fact that we even we're even talking about it and we're having this as a conversation now, this wouldn't be happening 10 years ago. So that in itself is progress. Companies wouldn't be recognizing these things. There wouldn't even be this term called glass ceiling. I would kind of conclude saying, yes, I think there is. I think people are very aware of it now in a way that they weren't 20, 30 years ago. And so I'd only hope that that's on the right journey to making a more acute change in the future.
And so what do you think is the solution? What is the solution to sort of...
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, I've had this conversation so many times. Like, I think firstly, not being so rigid in your expectations of what someone should do if they've had a break and when they come back, and what their progress means, right? It shouldn't be so linear. I feel that's part of the problem, is that, you know, there's that expectation of X person's gone on maternity leave, so for the next like 3 years after she comes back, she's not going to be able to give 100% to her job, and so automatically she might not be eligible for promotion, right? So that's an example I can think of. Or X person's only 26, 27 years old, we can't put them on the biggest account because they're not going to know how to deal with the client. Now, yes, okay, there might be some truth to that, because like I said, I think maturity and years of experience does play a part in that. But however, why don't we reframe it and so say, okay, we're not going to have them as the named lead on the account, but they can do all the background, you know, work for it, so that they're feeling like they're owning this huge project and getting the experience, but with the guidance of someone who perhaps has 10 years more experience with them, right? Like, I feel there's ways of going about it. I think secondly, not educating people. And so, you know, I look back on some situations I've been in and that other friends have been in. I don't think the people who've put boundaries on them are malicious or are trying to stunt their career by any means. I think they're just probably not really aware of like the issues that they're facing. And so I think that's on HR to train people a bit more around, okay, if someone's coming back to work, what is the progress going to look like for the next couple of years? Or we've got a really like 3 really talented people in our graduate scheme. How do we excel them to the point that we don't then lose them in 5 years' time because they've hit a glass ceiling in our current company? And so I think so the education aspect is definitely on the onus of the company, I think, and training their managers to make sure that, you know, they're being aware of these things. And then I think it's just talking to each other. You know, I think the more we share our stories, I think the more we share our ideas and the frustrations that we have, it links back to that second point of, you have the formal training, but then you have the informal training from these coffee chats or these water cooler conversations or whatever they are. Even if it makes a difference to one person in 1 year, that's still better than no one the year before.
Yes. And also having ideals, like you said. The onus is not just on the company, it's also on, for generations, you know, women have been the nurturer, the mother, the wife. And so even for maybe the women themselves think, oh, now that I've had a baby, my priorities have changed. But just to give them that confidence, somebody who you can look up to and somebody who inspires you within the organization is great, I think, also.
This isn't a direct answer to your question, but I think one of the frustrations that a lot of my friends and I have is that just because you don't have kids doesn't mean that you're devoting 24 hours to your job. Recognizing that just because someone doesn't have a child doesn't mean that maybe they don't want to do night calls till like, you know, 10 p.m. or something, or maybe want to do something else, right?
Yeah, that's no excuse that, oh, you don't have a family, you can,
yeah. So I mean, I that's not a direct answer to your question you asked, but I think that's one of the things that also I kind of always encourage people to think that, okay, like, it doesn't matter what someone's personal circumstances are, whether they have to log off at 5 o'clock to go and pick up a child, or maybe they want to log off at 5, or they're like doing calls again from 7, right? Like, it's I think it's just being mindful of different circumstances.
I actually have remembered what I wanted to ask you before, so I'll still ask you that. So I wanted to ask you this, which some people, especially my generation, can't get their heads around, and especially if you've come from a very Asian sort of background, you know, like myself. So you are a classics graduate and you moved into a financial institution. As a leader, what is it that, you know, what are those skills, that those transferable skills that are, you know, have got you to where you are?
I feel like I'm back at my graduate scheme interview.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? I'm being quite honest. A few of my friends will still wonder, but she did media, you know, why is she doing this? Why is she not working for a newspaper?
Yeah, no. Look, okay, I think it's a very valid question. I get it all the time. You know, I think even when I was considering asset management as a career. Everyone told me, but you haven't got a maths degree, you haven't got an economics degree. How on earth are they going to take you? And I'm not going to lie, like at the time, even I was just like, okay, this is going to be a long shot, but I'm kind of convinced that I can do it, right? And so to break it down, it was not easy. I applied for something like 80 graduate programs. Like it was a lot. I got offers from two, and then obviously got on to one. So you can see the odds were very, very slim. The way I'd kind of worded it to the company that I joined was essentially a language degree, I think, is like a maths equation because there's only one right answer. So you're translating this huge sentence, but it's one answer, right? So the way your brain is programmed to think is like a maths degree. Like you have to learn all the algebra skills in terms of the, grammar.
Yeah.
You have to know that you only have one proper answer. So it's no different to doing an algebra equation. And I'm simplifying. So I think that's number one. But I think, fundamentally you have to have a base level of intelligence, right? Like that's kind of, and you have to demonstrate that in the interviews and on the aptitude tests. And so, yeah, I had to do a lot of prepping. And so I used to wake up at 4:30 in the morning. So I used to have a job at that time in headhunting. I used to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and I'd do maths practice for the first hour and a half. And then I'd do an hour of applications every morning before I went into work. And I did that for 6 months. And it was painful. There were so many moments where I was like, I don't know what I am thinking doing this because this is clearly such a long shot. But I think, I knew deep down, I was like, I know I'm smart enough. I just haven't done the right degree. And surely there will be some firm that will recognize that I've got the skills that it would take to be successful in this job. And ultimately, if they reject me, it's their loss because I know I can add a lot of value to the company that will hire me.
The old adage of hard work and conviction and persistence still applies.
Yeah, I think it still applies, but I think it's also, how do you show that you're different? And I think that's the key thing I keep telling people now. And I keep saying, my sister's applying for applications right now, and it's the one thing I keep saying to her, like, you've got to think outside the box. How are you different to all the other people who are applying? Because there are thousands of applications, and like I said earlier, the supply is a lot higher than the demand in the world that we live in today in terms of candidates and jobs available. So how do you continually demonstrate that you're different? And so for me, I leaned a lot on the things that I'd done, which other people hadn't done. So that included, I did a unpaid internship whilst I was at university at London Business School 1 day a week. That was something that a lot of people I knew hadn't done, and I'd had the fortune of being able to do that. I'd interacted with very senior leaders through that internship at the age of 18, right? So I really amplified that in my application. Then secondly, I had been a president of a university society. Again, I knew a lot of people wouldn't have that. So again, leadership skills, financial planning events from start to finish, like really showing that you can take ownership of a project and be given a deadline and stick to it. The other thing was just ideas. So, I went to my assessment day and I just had so many ideas for the team. And I was like, why aren't you doing it this way? Why aren't you doing it that way? And I remember in my feedback that I'd got, the HR lady was like, you're brimming full of ideas, got this very feisty nature that we like. And I was like, no one's ever called me feisty before. But I think that feistiness was maybe mistaken for the passion or like the enthusiasm that I felt that they could be doing things a lot better. And so ultimately I think that, and then just, it's a numbers game, it's like applying for anything, right? Like you're not necessarily going to get the first thing that you apply for. I think you've got to just learn from every single application that you've done, every interview that you go through, really like be willing to put in the time. Like I said, it was just a sheer case of hours and persistence. And I think I knew deep down that I could get it. I think it was just a case of when. And so I think that self-belief, I think a lot of people were like, what are you doing? And I then somehow had at the back of my head, like, I'll prove it to you that it is going to work out.
I also find about you, because I've known you for a few years now, Ashlesha, and I remember at universities, when you were at university, you already had that, maybe not a very clear vision of, you want to be working in this sector or whatever, but you were very ambitious. And I know from the advice you were giving my son, you said, you need to just go out, and do unpaid internships, go to museums, go to anything related to languages. It doesn't matter what it is, and just try and get your foot in, and just try and get some internships, try and get whatever experience you can. And of course, you were talking from experience, because that's exactly what you had done. For you, university. So university is not just for night outs and drinking, which it wasn't for you. Maybe that as well. Why not? Enjoy yourself. But you had that apply yourself. And I think that's how you were different to the other youngsters in my eyes.
Well, thank you. I definitely had a lot of fun as well, so don't worry.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing is, I've had my parents right from the start giving me the guidance and, saying don't waste your time at university, as in like have fun, definitely have fun, but just be aware that you can't suddenly wake up the day you graduate and then start thinking about all of this, because it takes time to build up this portfolio. And so, that was a piece of advice from a very young age that my parents gave, and that's always stuck with me. So, I've now got to this point where sometimes I need to chill out a bit. I really I just need to actually just be in the moment sometimes, rather than constantly thinking about the next step. But yeah, I do think I do now on reflection think that constant thinking about the next step, and then thinking, okay, well, let's work. If I want to be here, what do I need to be doing now? So working backwards, and then just trusting. One thing I really struggle with sometimes, people today who are at university, is that they just expect to leave university with a 2-1 and just walk straight into a job. And I'm like, guys, this is not how the world works. Like, I interview a lot of people now, and because there's so many of them, and that's my point. It's like, you're very good as an individual, but unfortunately there's just too many of you. And so what are you doing to continuously show that you are different from other people?
You're going to stand out.
Yeah. One thing I've always been very firm on is I'm not doing anything that is inauthentic or that doesn't feel natural to me, because I know what my values are and I know what I stand for, and so I'll do stuff in line with
so
that.
You're not just doing it because you think this is going to get me a job. That integrity and that authenticity.
Especially now, again, like more interviews I kind of do on the other side. It's funny, you're able to really spot the fakes from the genuine people very, very quickly. After you've got a bit of experience on your side, I think you definitely can work it out.
Great. Another thing, as we were talking, and it was going to be my question, is as a leader, how do you work across cultures? However, the Western companies are outsourcing to the Asian market, and it's huge, right? And I remember so many years ago, the Indian outsourced teams would really bend over backward and attend calls like 3:00 in the morning, and just to adjust. But now I see that people are a bit more considerate, that, oh, is it 3:00 in the morning for you? Okay, let's adjust, or just getting used to the idea that, okay, my manager, my senior manager could be based in India. Just that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, again, a lot more of that now than there was 10, 15 years ago. And again, I'll go back to technology for that. I think that's been the biggest, aid in that whole process. Even simple things like people now, check times. Like Outlook has a function where you can just add in the location and you can see times. Like, that stuff probably wasn't there 15, 20 years ago, right? Yeah. I also think COVID's actually really helped in a weird way with that, because everyone for the first time was stuck at home and you couldn't rely on the physical meetings of someone from India coming to the UK to meet you in person, where on your time zone, you had to kind of meet them halfway on their time zone, which was like a novelty for a lot of people. I think that awareness has just really grown a lot because of that. So, I have colleagues in the US who probably didn't realize what the time difference is with Singapore. So I do a lot of late night calls. And I think that's been one of the really pleasant things that's come out of COVID for me, is that there's a bit more shared ownership on who's doing the late night shift. And I don't think necessarily that would have been there pre-COVID, because that awareness was not as high as it is now. Technology, and then, like I said, I think this has been one of the positive implications of COVID, in my opinion.
Or even things like now as a corporate organization, you are aware of the festivals in India, and you will know that, okay, it's Diwali time, that's why there's less, fewer number of people on the teams, and just that cultural awareness as well, thanks to media and like you say, technology has, I find that sort of from my experience. One last question on sort of the financial topic. Any advice for young people, women, or anybody really, on how to become financially independent? Because I think that women in general seem to take a step back, and they don't want to know about the financial side. It's so important to be financially independent. What do you think, and how does one go about it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a topic that I feel very passionately about. I think as someone who works in finance, I think someone who has seen many friends struggle with the concept of financial literacy. And then also having grown up, I graduated at the peak of the last recession. Like, I've seen how people have really struggled to rebound, pay off debts, and know how to manage their finances. So I think, again, I would kind of put it down to 3 points. I think it's a very important topic. This is the thing I can't really get my head around, is people talk about their physical health and they take it so seriously, so they calorie count, they exercise. Mental health now is an area that obviously has got some much deserved recognition over the last few years. And so therapy is now a very acceptable thing to do, mental health days or charities devoted to it or helplines. What I don't understand is how financial health still is lagging between the two so much, because I feel that financial health has such an impact on especially your mental health, but even your physical health, right? Like if you're not saving enough, then you might not have the right amount of money to buy nutritious foods or to get a gym membership, or it might be causing you stress, which might be causing you anxiety and causing you loads of mental health problems. So I think the three of them are so linked, and I just find it fascinating that financial health is always the one that everyone just doesn't take seriously. So they're like, oh yeah, my pension scheme, oh whatever, I'll deal with it, when I'm 60, or oh yeah, I should be saving, or oh, I forgot to pay off my credit card, oh, it's fine. Like it's just a bit of a flippant and overlooked area, and it's something that needs to be addressed. So the way I would approach it is, firstly, live within your means. I think so many people do not live within their means, and that is what causes so many mental health issues and anxiety, and again, all the impacts that I said before. I've always been a firm believer in that you should save at least 40% of your salary if you can, because unfortunately, we are, if you can, right? Like, I appreciate that people have different circumstances. We could all lose our jobs tomorrow, right? Like, so my baseline is at least have 6 months to live on, so that if you lose your job tomorrow, you can still pay your rent, pay off your taxes, anything that you need to do. And 6 months, I feel, is a good buffer to kind of find another job and find something that you're not just desperately going into as well. I think secondly, people just don't think about retirement early enough. So there's especially when you start working, like, why would you be thinking about when you're 65, 70, right? Like, you just want to spend all your money and go and buy that dress and go to that nice restaurant because you can, because it's exciting having money coming in and having this independence that you haven't really had up until that point. But not putting aside money in a pension scheme, you unfortunately then you get to a point where you're 40, 50, and then it's too late to then start recuperating for the first 20 years of your life when you haven't been contributing to a pension scheme. And then so all that ends up happening is that I think you end up working a bit longer than you originally would want to and not retiring when you want to. Or secondly, your quality of life then gets compromised when you retire. And I just think that's such a sad thing, because, what have you spent this entire life working towards, right? It's so that you can enjoy your retirement and finally not be thinking about bills and just you deserve it after working for 50, 60 years, right? Just to enjoy a good quality of life when you retire. So so definitely not overlooking, I think, your retirement scheme, whether that's a DC pension plan, whether you want to do that, in an ISA, whether that's in a DB pension scheme, whatever it is. And then I think the third thing, and this is the one that sometimes I find the most annoying, is that educate yourself. There are so many resources out there: Instagram, TikTok, traditional websites, financial advisors if you want to speak to them in person. There's so much. Yes, I think it's a very overwhelming world, and it's very scary. But the thing that I kind of say to all of my friends, I'm like, guys, you've spent an hour researching a trip to Morocco. Spend that hour researching what a cash ISA is. Have a look on YouTube. There's 1,000 videos that break it down into really, really easy steps. So we don't have that excuse anymore that we can't educate ourselves, because there are so many resources available out there. And I honestly, I just think it's down to a bit of ignorance and laziness. And so the way I've kind of advised my friends is like, look, you're not going to become a financial advisor in a year's time. Just start off slowly. Like, even if you're listening to one podcast a week and you've learned something new, that's better than what you knew a year ago. Or even if you are starting off by just investing $50 a month for a year just to play around and see what's going on. Again, that's something more than you knew. But just there's just ample resources out there that weren't there, again, aided by technology mainly. And they're free, most of them. So why not use them, right? So I do think it's everyone's own responsibility to make themselves financially sound and informed. And whether that pays off and makes you rich by the time you're 40, I highly doubt it. But at least you've got to I think you kind of owe it to your future self to start taking action for your financial state in 30 years' time now, right? Like, you owe that to your future self.
What I found striking about your advice is that, it's now, it's everything about now. You're not thinking of when I retire, where will you find the money to go on a cruise for? It's not that. It's like, how will you be financially independent if you lost your job? What will you do? Maybe you're 50, maybe you're 60. Start saving now, because it's always better than not.
Right, someone who's maybe 45 right now and has never really known what to do about their finances, it's still going to make a difference if you start today versus in 10 years' time. That 10-year gain is still going to help you. So yeah, okay, fine, maybe you didn't do it for the first 25 years, fine. Like, but there's no point in looking back and regretting that. Like, what you can do is realize that, okay, this is what I need to do now. And so now I can make a change, and it's still going to have a huge effect on my quality of life whenever I decide to retire, versus if I don't take any action.
No, thank you. Thank you for doing this. I'm so glad we did it.
Yeah, me too. And thank you for your time, for the very